Thank you. Councilmember Fruin?
Sure, I'll try to make this one brief. I'll keep you up here first. There was a comment earlier with regard to Public Resources Code 4291 and why there was or wasn't sign-off on documentation related to this statute. But as I read the code, that seems to apply to projects that are in the state responsibility area. Is that accurate?
So 4291 is basically mainly vegetation management. So with regard to the actual structures, 4290 is actually the one that applies. The closest component to that, there is overlap because 4291 does include Zone 0. So anything in all three zones. So we are actually to very high. All three apply. So 4291 does, but is not part of the building process. You still have to observe. We will now be observing for this particular project until it gets memorialized in a current accepted standard and adopted. We will be getting the Zone 0 components, which we don't have to in the rest of the state at this moment. You'll get the Zone 1, the 5 to 30. That's going to be separation of vegetation and placement in strategic ways, including the elimination of any fuel back to the structure. We'll have that 30 to 100 to the property line will include everything that basically will get fire from getting from either the treetops down or down to the treetops by eliminating and getting rid of what we call ladder fuels. Also, spacing takes into account slope and other types of vegetation. There's an entire list of acceptable fire safe or fire safe vegetation types, and those that are absolutely not supported or restricted. So it's pretty comprehensive. It's been in place for quite a long time, and it is going to be part of the fuel mitigation evaluation, the actual fuel mitigation plans that may end up resulting in it. These things will all be in scope. Once again, when it's time to actually apply them, we will apply them.
Okay, so in part, this is a timing issue, and there are certain things that are appropriate to address at the building permit stage.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Exactly. It's just like we couldn't actually tell you what the actual configuration of where the sprinkler heads are going to be because it hasn't been submitted. It is one of those things that we call a deferred submittal because they have to get the building to a certain point before the actual final decisions on some of those things are memorialized in a plan set, and then they come through for evaluation. So the timing, it's a project. So a project plan and a project schedule is the way that these things work. Everything is done in a specific order. They have their constraints, and they basically have their things that have to happen before or after. So we won't see the sprinkler plans until later, which is also the vegetation. The landscaping plans are going to be something that we see a little bit later on as well.
Okay, all right. And if it doesn't meet those standards, you would not presumably approve a permit?
Absolutely not.
Okay, all right. And then for Luke, there was a comment with respect to how the Planning Commission proceedings moved. And my recollection, and from having watched it at least 3 times, is that there were 2 motions that occurred. Neither motion was ever to recommend denial of the project. It was rather a first motion offered by one member of the commission and seconded by another to approve approve the staff recommendation, which was to recommend approval but without credit for the park and lieu fees. And then there was a second, that motion did not carry. There was a second motion that did carry with the other 3 members of the Planning Commission who recommended approval with that credit.
Yes, correct. And even the comments of the commissioners in summing up, I think for the housing development, there appeared to be a 5-0 support. The 3-2 vote occurred with the trail connection and the reduction in fees. That
Okay.
there were 2 commissioners who clearly did not support that.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go next to Councilmember Mohan and then Vice Mayor.
A quick question for you, Fire Chief. Since this property has always been in the high hazard zone, and it's now been reclassified as very high hazard zone, what is the adjustment that you had to make in your review?
Great question. Thank you for that. It actually it wasn't subject to 4290 before. There was no 30-foot setback requirement. And when I was here to present the LRA map adoption, and I was the one that tried to explain to you why there was such a big change. So with that, one of the things that I talked about essentially, what is the difference? The difference is that there are going to be different building standards. There are going to be different things that are required for the Chapter 7A. So we had to make sure that, first of all, Cupertino did desire 4290 to apply, and we confirmed that. Once that happened, we actually applied it. So that happened in December. Was it December for us? I think it was in December. That we actually realized that, okay, or where the decision was made to make sure that we applied it. So that's when the deficiency was basically when it became a deficiency. So the line moved. So that was what we did, and that's how we handled it. We applied 4290 when it became the law.
Oh, okay. When you say the line moved, what is the line?
So the actual zone was high. High does not require minimum fire safe standards in the LRA. It still does not. It's only very high. So with that, the defensible space component also does not apply. So the 3 zones is not something that a person in the high or the moderate has to do currently. So having that transition over from high to very high means that now the defensible space and the building standards and 4290 apply. So we applied them.
Can you repeat that? That I sort of missed the last words.
So before, there was no requirement for defensible space.
Right.
There was no 30-foot setback requirement. There was no fuel mitigation or defensible space, and there was no requirement for some of the building standard stuff. So with that, being now after, I think you adopted in June, I think it was 17th or something like that, where after the second reading, at that point it became law. So we had to verify through Cupertino that you indeed did want it to. Our recommendation, of course, would have been to apply it. So the answer that came back and the verification was yes, apply it. So that's when we actually applied it, and that's where the mitigation was required, because that's when the deficiency actually became a deficiency. It was not a deficiency before. Is that clear? Do you want to add anything, Brett? All right. I can try again.
No, I'm just a little puzzled that now from high to very high, and now the setback has
That's
decreased?
correct. So the setback requirement, before, when it was in the high, and before the LRA map adoption, that was actually the event that changed the requirements or the rules. When that was adopted by council, at that point, this property became part of the adopted map, which said you are in the very high.
Right.
So it changed the designation, which also changed the requirement. So now the requirement wasn't 10 feet, it was 30. So they actually, I believe, had a compliant setback before that. Once council adopted LRA, it did not. So they found themselves in a position, and once again, it's for the developer to respond to with regard to the decisions they made at that point, change it or go for the exception. This is their choice, and it is the choice that they made to put in for the exception.
Okay, and you have approved the change from 30 to 10?
The change from 30 to 10 happened because of the action of the LRA map adoption. The actual line and the project did not change. So when the exception process came in, we went through the same practical effect evaluation through 4290. We applied it as it prescribed for us, and we went through, and they had proposed enough, and it was deemed that they did meet same practical effect.
Okay.
So if this did not change, if we're going to get to for instance, if This zone did not change. That setback would not have required an AMMR or or an exception request.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor, and then Councilmember Wong.